Welcome to today's Zoom meeting. My name is Deva Green and I'm facilitating a discussion about Pluto in Pisces or Pluto in the 12th house. My thought process to help guide and facilitate a discussion around the core archetypes or themes of Pluto being in Pisces or the 12th house is to first talk about the sign of Pisces and the sign of Pluto and synthesize those in order to arrive at a cohesive and accurate understanding of the totality, seeing it's in the spirit of Pisces, the totality of expressions that the archetype can take. One size does not fit all. And from my own personal studies, I've gained the most understanding by being able to take an archetype or a sign and understand its diverse expressions within that archetype. And that takes understanding how to synthesize, which from my vantage point is the challenge of astrology, is to really synthesize or blend two signs or archetypes together to arrive at the whole picture. So starting with the sign of Pisces then, which should be on the next slide. The sign of Pisces symbolizes or signifies the need to complete or bring to culmination an entire evolutionary cycle. From a broad view, it's every other sign compiled or composite into one sign. Emotionally, that can feel very overwhelming, as that an entire cycle is now being brought to a place of needing to be let go, being brought to closure, culmination, to be brought to completion. And it can leave a very real feeling of the sand running through the fingers. That with that entire cycle that's coming to completion, that there are many areas that are being brought to closure. And oftentimes that can create a feeling of, again, the sands running through the fingers. Along with that, then the intention is to align with ultimate meaning or to cultivate ultimate meaning. The sign of Pisces indicates an area that we all have a natural need to, from within ourselves, align with an aspect of our life that can give us or can complete us in a sense from an ultimate point of view. And ultimately through the process of what can be called the purging of dreams. We'll get more into that with Pluto and Pisces, the purging of fantasies and so on, that we realize only an inner connection with source or the creator or God, goddess, whatever term you'd like to choose, can create that ultimate meaning. So it's almost like a process of balloons popping. We can act upon this fantasy or that fantasy only to find, as the analogy goes, life is but a dream. And that's to where spiritualization comes through, meaning that as that balloon is being popped, as we're ultimately being brought back to source through the painful experience of often disillusionment, of really asking ourselves through that process, where is true and lasting satisfaction going to come from? What is ultimately going to bring lasting meaning in my life? And it's not conscious, but it's through the pain of what the heart goes through at that time of the purging of balloons, of fantasies of what can seem so real, that is the creator really pulling on our heartstrings and asking us to come home. Where is it that we're going to be complete? Where is it that we're going to find our inspiration? What is ultimately true and what ultimately is not? So this is the very deep and, from my point of view, cleansing effect of Pluto and Pisces in the 12th house, is that it brings all those areas under that metamorphic and intense laser beam of Pluto to bring up all the illusions, to bring up all the fantasies, to bring up all the delusions that are not in alignment with the need to spiritualize, to co-create with Source, and to align with an area of life where ultimate meaning can truly be found. So it's through, again, through that bursting of delusions that a culmination happens and we align with the timeless or the infinite. And we can propel healing through a merging with the creator, with what ultimately is real, and release or let go of what is not real. So it's through those bursting of fantasies that we ultimately come back to source, or that we align with what is real and can manifest the intrinsic inspiration that source can generate in all of us. And from my vantage point, that's one of the strongest points of Pisces, and especially when Pluto's in Pisces, is the power to inspire through promoting a different awareness, or a different perception of reality, of what reality can be. Ultimately, it's a retrieval of how Source is meant to use us. And Pluto in the 12th house souls, or Pluto in Pisces, can be magnets or can energize that in the best level of expression. So it's through the release of what's not real, the release of fantasies and delusions, that we ultimately align with Source. And then moving into the sign of Pluto, or the archetype of Pluto, then it's the process of metamorphosis. An analogy that's given to us by my father, Jeffrey Wolf Green, is the caterpillar that makes the cocoon that turns into the butterfly. It really becomes a whole different organism through that process of regeneration and through metamorphosis. So when we're synthesizing, how Pluto is, how, remember, the challenge of astrology is to synthesize these two archetypes. The image that comes to me anyway, that may relate to Pluto in the 12th house or Pisces, is that phoenix rising from the ashes. Everything that's come before, it's with the intensity of Pluto, it's giving rise to, or it's releasing everything that the soul is attached as having ultimate meaning. And it's aligning that individual ego with the source, the wave returning to the sea. So the metamorphic process that would be happening in this case with Pluto and Pisces in the 12th house is one wherein the soul is actively dissolving all barriers that are preventing a direct merging with the creator. That can be super confusing when we don't understand it in a conscious way. What can end up happening are cycles of disassociation, disillusionment, emptiness, where almost nothing seems real. So the metamorphic process is bringing that to a focal point, or bringing that to a metamorphic point. And that can bring up habits or compulsions that what can happen with Pluto being in the 12th house or Pisces is that the soul projects the totality of its being through one dynamic or through one lens. And through the power of the belief in that one single dynamic, the soul can seem larger than life, almost iconic, because of the power of belief in that one area. And that's the soul's resistance to releasing those parts of the ego, or those parts that have been attached to itself from an egocentric point of view, and are resisting that total merging with the creator, that release of the egocentric identification at a total level. When the soul does that, when it finds the courage and faith to step into the eternal, to come out of that precipice, or to surrender to the light of what's unknown, the regeneration, the rebirth, the phoenix rising from the ashes, it's like the soul can realize itself as a total or cosmic being. And it can release the limitations of projecting itself through that singular ego. And that comes down to the dual desires within the soul, one to return and one to separate. There are three reactions to this impulse within Pluto in the 12th house. One is to totally resist the need to surrender or the need to merge with the creator and release all egocentric identifications that are preventing that merging. And it's almost like it becomes the absolute defense around any force higher than itself. And that's not common, but what that can create is almost an inner iconic or messianic image of oneself to make oneself larger than life as a defense mechanism. Again, that's not common, and that reflects a total resistance to this evolutionary shift or necessity from an evolutionary point of view to move with those tides. The second is to cooperate in some ways and to resist in others. And in this situation, it's a very deep and intense feeling of standing upon a precipice. And you're right at the gate of what's at the in the dark or the light of the known world and the absolute darkness of the unknown, the abyss, infinity. And you're standing right at that precipice, right at that spot. Which way do I go? And in some ways, the soul can release those egocentric identifications, can merge with source, and at other times can hold on to those identifications that were so real or that the soul projected a total image out of. So that's the most common, to be willing to do this in some ways and in other ways not. And then the third reaction is to totally surrender and to totally go into the light of the unknown in such a way that the soul almost becomes reborn, that it has a revelation of itself as a reflection of the creator or as a timeless and cosmic being that's not influenced by any social conditions, any identity that was prior to that, the culmination of the 12th house, rather that wave coming back to the ocean, realizing that it's but an aspect of the creator, and so is everybody else. And with that too, there can be a lesson of proper judgment or discernment. That's the sixth house polarity point, is to focus or to harness the intrinsic spiritual energies of the 12th house Pluto in such a way that whatever identities or whatever old patterns the soul needs to jettison can come into that discretionary light of the sixth house polarity point. And that can, one form of that can take through karma yoga, through one's right work. It can manifest as the seeing reality as it is rather than as the soul would like to see it, or through rose-colored glasses. That's actually a way of preventing the necessary focusing or channeling the 12th house energies for a humanitarian good. From my understanding, the sixth house polarity point represents the service or service oriented work for humanity that the 12th house Pluto is almost destined to do, some sort of humanitarian work. So the sixth house polarity point is asking a release of fantasies and delusions so that the light of actual reality and the healing from disillusionment can take place. What's real? What's not? How do I focus my total being through the work that I do? One aspect of that being karma yoga. And one way that this can take place is through the creation of healing crises. And crisis is meant to bring these lights to a head so that the necessary adjustments can take place. And within that is the lesson of proper judgment. That, from my understanding, one way that that resistance can happen, or one of the areas that the 12th house Pluto can get drawn into for security purposes, is almost not wanting to judge anybody or anything, It can be like a Florence Nightingale, not exercising any discrimination around whom to help and whom not. And from my understanding, it's integrating the function of judgment relative to ideals. That can be the sign of Pisces, or the 12th house is ideals, and when to judge by intention. That it's the process of uh, seeing where we did err, not trying to blind that, or not trying to create a rationalization around not judging anybody or anything, but to judge based on intention, that yes, this was an error. And as they say, to err is human, forgiveness divine, meaning that we all have in it that the intention to get better, or the intention to correct errors, is ultimately the only thing that we can do, is to correct any errors that we made, as to align us with ultimately what's true, what's not true, timeless rights and wrongs, in a way that we're not imposing a idealistic standard, but that we're exercising the sixth house discretion of how to use judgment in order to heal from past errors, to make necessary adjustments, course corrections, and so on. Because it can be very easy either to not want to judge anybody or anything, or to, in a sense, almost persecute others relative to a timeless standard or a timeless code of conduct, as a means of the soul almost persecuting itself. I did not act in the right way, and the guilt around that. So through the self forgiveness and adjustment, the making the necessary corrections as judgment, the natural shift from the 12th to the 6th can be facilitated. Exercising of healthy judgment, knowing whom to help and knowing whom not, and knowing the best alignment with one's right form of work. It's my understanding that mundane work, working just to work, will not do, relative to the inherent spiritual energies or cosmic energies that can come through Pluto in the 12th. So the work function is meant to act as like a lens, or as a way to bring to a focal point the often diffused spiritual energies of the 12th house Pluto. And that comes down to desire, that again, relative to those three responses to the necessities of Pluto in the 12th, some to totally resist and to stay in the light of the known world, others to stay poised on that precipice, unable to move either way, or a little in both direction, a little in the known world and a little in the abyss, or the third, to totally go for it and to take the plunge, or to totally embrace the light of the unknown, which the first two are not common. And the second is the most common relative to desire, being willing to do in some ways and others and not. And again, that no one size fits all, that the expression of this Pluto in the 12th house is going to be relative to evolutionary state, evolutionary condition, that in the consensus state ruled by Saturn, that the Pluto in the 12th house, in terms of tuning into or merging the individual will with the will of the creator, can be expressed in a Saturnian context in general, either charities. It can be through a type of humanitarian work that is integrated within the mainstream, as a way of shifting from the 12th to the 6th. It can come as forms of volunteering one's service, or to, let's say, for example, being able to donate one's time to those who are in need, or those who are underserved in a mainstream context. In the individuated state, it can manifest as an alignment with spiritual work within the alternative fields. This can manifest as either a type of, let's say, dream work that includes a more uh, humanitarian or universal point of view, such as the works of Carl Jung. That can be a way to harness into, or a way to manifest one's spiritual capacities via right work in the alternative state. It can also be various forms of meditation that help the soul tune into either a way to heal uh, unresolved trauma. Uh, it can be regression work. Those are all within the alternative realms that harness into going from the 12th to the 6th, where that allow that 12th house Pluto to really be refined. And in the spiritual state, this can manifest as a work within a spiritual community or healing practices or services where, let's say, specific forms of meditation, Kriya Yoga, um, as an example, or guided meditations. It can be working through specific breath work, which is Kriya Yoga. Those can be specific techniques within the spiritual state that help the soul tune into, again, its inherent spiritual capacities, or the underlying intention to merge the individual ego with the creator. We can go now into different examples of those who have 12th house Plutos to show the different expressions that 12th house Pluto can take relative to evolutionary state. The first example that I have is Tom Hanks. And from my understanding, he is in or transitioning into either already in the first stage individuated, or transitioning from third stage consensus into the first stage individuated. He has Pluto in the 12th house, new phase Jupiter, which is the ruler of his north node in Sag in the third. He has south node in Gemini in the ninth, ruled by Cancer in the 10th house. Seeing that it's in the first stage individuated, the way that he would naturally be guided to inspire or to motivate or to tune into the potential of that 12th house Pluto would be linked to an expression or a communication, seeing the south node in Gemini in the ninth, of our individual spark, of how we're all in essence made with our own individual thumbnail or thumbprint, that the source is meant to use us all in our own individual ways, that it's not one and the same. And he, from my point of view, expresses that through the different roles that he plays, whether it's being expressed through such a role as Forrest Gump, just a simple man, but yet how he was inspired just simply to help in these really small, simple ways. Um, I think one of the funniest scenes that I can also see reflected in the chart is when he goes through a painful breakup with a girlfriend, Jenny, and she gets him running shoes as a parting gift. And so he puts on the running shoes and he just starts to run. And he just runs across this state and that state, and everybody starts to project, what does it mean? What does it mean? And are you running for world peace? Are you running for women's rights? Are you running for this? Or are you running for that? He simply smiles and says, I'm just running to run. So that can be the humorous part about sometimes too, how all these ultimate intentions or the quote unquote meaning of things can get projected in such a way that it can become larger than life. And seeing the humor part can be the south node in the ninth, the north node in Sag, and that Jupiter new phase. It's really about tuning into one's most individual means of expressing one's connection to source. He's written books called The Unique Person, I think it's called, or The Unique Life. The sun in the Uranus sun or Uranus moon in Leo in the 11th. Coming out of a secretarian view can also be seen that in terms of his own evolution, he may have been involved with close others or even family, seeing the Mercury in Cancer in the 10th house and South Node in Gemini in the ninth that had a real narrow or had a real secretarian view about what this all was, a narrow definition of spirituality, of what source is and what it isn't, perhaps being even expressed through mainstream, seeing it's in the 10th house, and seeing the Venus retrograde in Gemini in the 10th, and also seeing the 11th house throwing that off, or embracing a larger framework, God expressed or source expressed in an individual, or from my viewpoint, in a natural expression, how even if you wouldn't, from a mainstream point of view, see it as that way, he had a lens or he had an ability to tune into and to see how source was using different people relative to their individuality, the way that they were primed, whether it was big, small, it didn't matter. So from my vantage point, it's expanding beyond that secretarian view and expressing a larger framework for what spirituality is, through what it's not, and to inspire us to play our role, so to speak, or to embrace however it is that we feel we're meant to use. And um, he also talks of loneliness. That one of the most beautiful quotes um, that I've read by him is one of his biggest battles was that of loneliness. And he says, everybody has something that chews them up. And for me, that thing was always loneliness. The cinema has the power to make you feel not lonely, even when you are. So it's almost like through these roles that he's playing, and through cinema, which is, from my vantage point, the 11th house is film, that he's able to tune into, or he's able to dissolve that part of himself that feels separate from source or that feels alone by tuning into a larger purpose, or an area that helps us connect to perhaps that place in all of us that can feel that way from time to time. Just knowing that somebody else feels that same way sometimes helps us feel not so alone. That we're together in that, so to speak, to inspire us to also to think in a different way about that in terms of the roles that he plays, and the universal messages that come through that. He also says that there's a difference between solitude and loneliness. I can understand the concept of being a monk for a while. So, from my vantage point, what he's communicating is the natural need for solitude that can also be 12th house, to balance alone time and the time spent working, and how solitude is different from loneliness. That in solitude we can tune into, or we can connect to this universal or higher energy, to inspiration, so to speak. And sometimes isolating ourselves, or secluding ourselves can be a way to tune into that, or to tune out what the 12th house Pluto may be receiving from the external environment. Um, so from my vantage point, in this case, in terms of evolutionary state, the way the 12th house Pluto is manifesting is really one through the career or through the profession, communicating these higher or universal ideals, whether it's this role or that role, that it's not the work itself, but it's the orientation to it and what comes through it and the meaning that's associated with it. That's ultimately, from an ultimate point of view, what matters. And in that way, dissolving or bringing to completion these false beliefs or these false teachings about spirituality in general, or the quote unquote right way to spiritualize, that oftentimes we think it needs to be bigger than it is. And being a Sag, I really appreciate the humor and the laughter that his movies can convey around when we allow ourselves just to tune into that and to be motivated by that, how simple it becomes. It's just how we're meant to be used, big or small. And it takes away the wraparounds, it takes away the false beliefs or what we're often taught it is or should look like. And that's coming from the first stage individuated, a departure from the consensus, a liberation from mainstream or societal views, and aligning with a more cosmic or universal reality through specifically the profession. In this case, it's portraying unique roles. And you can see that in the chart through, um, from my understanding, the Mercury in the tints. You can also see that through the Leo energy, the Leo being self actualization, and the 10th house being the role in the world. So the next example here is Anne Frank. And from my understanding, she is in the either the third stage individuated, transitioning into the first stage spiritual, or stage spiritual. Her story is one of being confined and hiding while in Germany when the Nazis were persecuting the Jews, or the Nazi takeover, so to speak. And she was a younger girl. I think she was in her younger teenage, 12, 13. And through the confinement, or through being hiding and essentially experiencing being isolated from most of the world, she decided that she was going to journal, that she was going to make note, or she was going to write about her experiences that way. And seeing in her chart how she has Pluto in the 12th house and she has South Node in Scorpio in the 5th, which refers back to that Pluto in the 12th house, and North Node being in Taurus in the 11th, which is ruled by the Venus also in Taurus, but in the 10th house with Chiron closely there. From my understanding, that this was a lifetime in terms of culmination and completion of really bringing to completion the way that she was recognized, or the way that she was also communicating relative to these higher ideals, seeing that Mercury is retrograde in the 11th and also the Sun in Gemini in the 11th. The need for self empowerment, or the need to self empower from the inside out versus trying to draw that in from the externals, that in many ways feeling disempowered, whether it was her gender, whether it was how young she was. There were many ways in which she was desiring to consolidate or to communicate a message that would be meaningful or real, or that would last or stand the test of time. And ultimately, she found a mechanism to do that. And I also appreciate her self humor. She writes about how, in many ways, she tried to get attention at first by being a clown, trying to make people laugh, by trying to draw this, by trying to essentially, from my viewpoint, to be heard, seeing that the Mars is in Leo in the first, and it squares the notes. So it's a skip step that in other lifetimes too, she may have had an early ending just as she did this time, for the purposes of throwing her back on herself. It's almost like it's preserving this from the inside out. Seeing that Saturn is retrograde in Sag in the sixth, it also speaks to, well, and it trines her moon in Leo in the second, which trines Neptune. It's an inspiration for those who have also experienced persecution, situations that would really promote the feelings of defeat, or being defeated by one's life conditions, that essentially seeing the fifth house and seeing Pluto, or seeing that it's in Scorpio ruled by Pluto, there may have been an unconscious message of, I'm going to submit here, or there's really no purpose in trying to actualize or trying to manifest what I feel as my creative abilities, South Node in the fifth. Ultimately, how to express that relative to being confined to those different factors that would reinforce that those underlying messages or that underlying psychology. And the 11th house is liberating from that, that essentially it was through preserving that from within herself, despite the external circumstances. Self-preservation, holding on to what she felt was right, and holding on to what she felt was true and meaningful, no matter what was going on out there, as intense as it was. And that, from my vantage point, created an inspiration for us all to, which can be applied, or from my vantage point, can be meaningful relative to current circumstances in our lives, to collective circumstances. That at the core of it is maintaining your own goodness, no matter what. It's so easy for any of us to say, well, X, Y, and Z, so then I'll go ahead and I'll do X, Y, and Z, and kind of compromise or pollute my character, or undermine my values, or go back on what I know to be true. And some quotes that she has about this, which I find really encapsulate this transition, or how she became a messenger through inwardly preserving what we know to be true and good in ourselves, and to liberate these patterns of external, um, uh, having this come from external sources, seeing the South Node and Scorpio in the fifth, and self-empowering from the inside out, which was facilitated through shock, through confinement, through really having no other avenue but being able to message, or being able to write in her own personal diary, in hopes that it would impact who it was meant to impact. And via that 12th house, the belief that this can be so, well, wow. I mean, it certainly, it's been preserved and will be preserved for years to come. Her message is still communicated in these times, and has impacted many. So that can be the true inspiration of the 12th house Pluto, and seeing that it's the sun is also in Gemini in the 11th, which is conjunct that Mercury. The message is meant to last, or to help us reinvent, or to rethink um, what goodness is, how where we can find that, so to speak, or it really makes us think differently about these higher ideals, or these higher principles, and are we going to, in a sense, demand that they come from the outside? That can be a real 12th house Pluto as well, that I expect these ideals to manifest on my external, or shifting really into internalizing and making those real from the inside out. I was personally very impacted by her message, that comes from preserving that on the inside. And a quote that really illustrates that, from my point of view, she says, the final forming of a person's character lies in their own hands. You can go through this or that. You can have really intense situations, but at the end of the day, it's any of our choices what we make of that and how we preserve our own character, so to speak. And she also says the best remedy for those who are afraid, lonely, or unhappy is to go outside, somewhere where they can be quiet, alone with the heavens, nature, and God, because only then does one feel that all is as it should be. Really connecting that from the internal versus the external, from my point of view, seeing the shift from Scorpio to Taurus, and also seeing the sixth house polarity point discernment, how best to tune into these universal forces. And the most famous quote, despite everything, I believe that people are really good at heart. So looking at her chart, seeing that it's either third stage individuated transitioning into first stage spiritual, the culmination is essentially rooting into those higher ideals or those higher principles and maintaining that or preserving that from the inside out and preserving hope. That uh, focusing on the goodness that's always there, the faith, so to speak, and not getting caught up in what is so dark or so on that could potentially pollute us. But to preserve that again on the inside, and seeing the sixth house, how best to shine or to share our light. Seeing that she also had the Leo energy, the Mars and Leo in the first squaring the nodes, recovering a skip step. Possibly one potential is that relative to circumstances or similar situations that she never wrote or she never preserved that type of a diary, perhaps feeling overwhelmed or succumbing or giving up relative to her circumstances. And so this time around, she became very determined to share this message with us all, to preserve this so that we can be inspired in our own ways to preserve our light. Um, having that in her, having that message come out in the ways it was intended to, which from my point of view, it certainly has. So in this context, it was about dissolving, from my understanding, either feeling disempowered or succumbing to external circumstances, and perhaps projecting or expecting that others always manifest these higher ideals, and really stepping into her own light, or really stepping into manifesting these from the inside out. And in Tom Hanks' case, seeing it was in the first stage individuated, really throwing off those consensus views of spirituality, really tuning into the unique expression that this can take, that it doesn't have to be mainstream or always big, but that it's meant to be in alignment with our individual design, with our thumbprint or our thumbnail, and communicating this through his profession, through his role, through these different characters that he's played. And in the end, from my vantage point, looking at Pluto in the 12th house or Pisces, that through the alignment with the Creator, and allowing those different egocentric attachments to dissolve, or those barriers to be brought to culmination and closure, that they can bring to us inspiration or a revolutionary understanding of life itself, or the meaning of reality, can bring back a cosmic or can bring a vision of the cosmic or the universal that many of us find motivating and inspiring, and also promote the need to spiritualize within ourselves. So that can be the biggest gift that these souls bring, is the courage to step into the abyss, to step into the unknown, to leave the light of the known world behind, and to maintain faith that even if it looks like or feels like that we're going into a nothingness, that the Creator will bring to us what we need when we need it, and to resurrect, just like the phoenix in the ashes, if need be, through stepping off the precipice. So, potentially, in the best expression, these souls can be messengers for universal truth, universal messages that have an inspiring impact for a long time to come. See here. So, in that light, always seeing too that to hold on to hope, or to in the best possible light, that if we're in situations where we're feeling disillusioned, or where we're having our own illusions or delusions popped, like those bubbles, that right underneath that, or the ultimate intention underneath that, is to try in the best way that we can to see that as the Creator or the source calling us back. What's real, what's not? Where are we going to find our most completeness, or what's going to bring that sense of unconditional love, and the sense of ultimate meaning? And so, even if we're going through disillusionment, or those experiences of life not being what we thought, that ultimately it's an echo, or again, it's the source's way of bringing us closer to itself, or bringing us back to the source. So to work through any pain, or to work through the difficulties of stepping off that abyss, with the courage and the faith that the source what's needed at that time, and to let go, or to release those areas that are bringing us, or are separating us from that, or are separating us from source. And in so doing, that ultimately we come into our wholeness, or we can tune into our totality, and to let go of those places that we've come to know as having total meaning, so to speak. So, how does the saying go? That pain prods remembrance, and to try in the best way to work with it in those ways, because of how difficult that the poppings of balloons, or how deep the feelings of disillusionment can be, and tuning into right's one underneath the surface, that ultimately it's the individual wave coming back to the sea. And the more we can do that, the more we can keep faith, the more we can motivate ourselves to take the steps that we need to, and to surrender to the unknown. So thank you for listening, and for being a part of the Zoom meeting. Those are my thoughts about Pluto and Pisces in the 12th house. Namaste.
Thank you, Deva. That's what a wonderful way to wrap up the series. That was wonderful. Your way with words is just marvelous.
Oh, I'm really glad that it came out clear. It can be so hard to talk about Pisces.
Yes, ma'am. Well, you did a really good job, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We all
Oh,
really
well, thank
appreciate
you
it.
guys so much for taking the time to keep doing these Zoom meetings. And I really appreciate your continuing to do that. It means a lot.
Absolutely. Do you have a new series in mind?
Oh, let's see. Well, let
Hmm.
me think about that, because that would actually be really great. That would be fun.
Okay, absolutely. We'll hold you to that.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Davis, so much.
Thank you. You guys have a great day.
You
You
too.
too.
Thank you.
Thanks.